C21, Family Standing. Chapter 21, Family Standing. News of today's unexpected incidents kept going around, alarming everyone in town. On this night, no one stayed in their homes. Everyone was out and about as they discussed the events. Actually, a boiler explosion at the factory was not exactly a serious matter. After all, the factory's boiler had blown up on more than one occasion due to years of poor maintenance. It was different this time, however. In the past, the wolf pack wouldn't have dared to attack a factory under the control of humans. Almost every factory had over 1,000 workers working in them, and it would get especially rowdy on the streets outside of town after the workday ended. Some of the workers would return to town to stay for the night while others would simply sleep overnight at the factory's dorms. The factories operated around the clock with 3 shifts of workers. The wolf pack was bold enough to venture into a small human settlement position right next to the stronghold. There was something very bizarre about this indeed. As the soldiers accompanying the band said, Stronghold 113 was situated in a larger circular group of other strongholds, and being on the inside of this circular group, it made their stronghold safer compared to the other places. At the beginning, the stronghold was still sending troops to garrison the factory. But when everyone realized that there were no wild animal attacks on the factories, they withdrew the troops and only left behind some guns for the factory managers to use in case of emergency. That night, the stronghold's city gate was suddenly opened. A loud rumbling could be heard as the stronghold's gate opened up. Then several hundred soldiers carrying loaded guns marched out. These were the private troops of Stronghold 113. Or to more aptly put it, they were the private army controlled by the King Consortium, the group behind Stronghold 113. The school teacher, Zhang Jinglin, once unwittingly mentioned that the Consortium was the actual controller of the stronghold these days. They had power over the lives of humans and possessed weapons that could be used to fight off the dangers of the outside world. With money and weapons, they were firmly in control of the entire stronghold. This was the first time Ren Jiasu and Yan Liuyuan had ever seen so many soldiers come out of the stronghold. Yan Liuyuan was hiding in the shack and secretly watching the private army as they marched out of town. He muttered, "Bro, are those guns they're carrying on their backs?" Those black guns looked brutal and menacing. However, Ren Jiasu was not surprised that he could recognize all of those weapons. Moreover, he had a feeling that, as long as he could get his hands on those firearms, he could use them to great effect immediately. The private army was not marching in an orderly fashion. There was an off-road vehicle leading the way, but the formation of the soldiers following it was a mess and could even be called chaotic. Someone from the private army complained, "Isn't it just some people dying at the factory? Why can't we head there tomorrow morning? Why do we have to go there and kill the wolves tonight?" "Shut up," the higher-ups ordered this mission. Someone glared at him. "What's there to be afraid of? It's not like those jackoffs in office can hear us anyway. They're probably still sleeping with women right now," that man grumbled. He then lit himself a thinly rolled cigarette. Ren Jiasu once again caught a whiff of that unusual smell of cigarettes. He frowned as he started increasingly distrust the stronghold's private troops. At this moment, the smoking soldier from the private army turned around and saw Ren Jiasu and Yan Liuyuan looking at his automatic rifle. He scolded, "What are the two of you brats looking at? Do you know what this is? Quit staring. You wouldn't know how to use it even if I gave it to you." Ren Jiasu pulled the curtain door down, although he did not agree with the latter half of what the soldier said. For some reason, he deduced that the soldier might not be good at marksmanship. His right shoulder pocket that was supposed to bear the recoil of the rifle did not show any signs of long-term training with firearms. In reality, what Ren Jiasu didn't know was that firearms these days were also quite precious resources in the stronghold. Usually, the private army's officers would not let the soldiers waste their ammunition. If they had that kind of budget, they would rather go drinking or look for women to fool around fault with. Alcohol was prohibited outside the stronghold, but it was not the case on the inside. Yan Liuyuan wondered, "Bro, Why do I feel that you seem to know about their guns? Renziasu gave him a look and said, don't ask so much. Yan Liuyuan complained, do I still have any standing in this family? Renziasu was thinking about something else as he replied nonchalantly, don't think too much about it. Your role in the family is just to stay alive. Yan Liuyan was speechless. When the sound of the private army's marching got further away, Renziasu shot to his feet and told Yan Liuyan, go to Big Sister Zio's shack tonight and stay there for a while. Come back only after I return. Bro, where are you going? Yan Liuyan asked in a stunned manner. By the time he finished asking, Renziasu had already quietly lifted the curtain door and gone out. A lot of people had gathered on the streets, so no one took any notice of Renziasu's whereabouts. Usually, no one would dare to come outside at night. But today, everyone had left their houses and come outside as though they were celebrating the new year. Renziasu navigated his way through the darkness. After leaving the proximity of the town, he began to bolt it forward. The moonlight was not very bright on this night, but as Renziasu had been going out of town almost every day for the past few years, he could essentially walk out here with his eyes closed. The stronghold's private army took the main road while Renziasu chose to go by a parallel path to avoid bumping into them. He came out here not for anything else but to see if there was an opportunity. As for what kind of opportunity it was, he was not sure yet. Guns. It was the guns that enticed Renziasu to come out here. Renziasu had acquired advanced firearms proficiency, so he knew very well how important firearms were in today's era. The private troops who were accompanying the band once said that they were carrying firearms with them and that any wolves would flee if they heard their gunshots. Renziasu, who had encountered the wolf pack before, knew exactly how terrifying they were. But such terrifying creatures were afraid of gunshots? Renziasu did not know what would happen to these private troops if they came face to face with the wolves. He was not thinking of getting their guns because his target was actually the factory. The people in town all knew that the factory managers were assigned firearms. According to the people who returned after fleeing the factory, it was already over for those who remained behind. Renziasu had been wondering about it since the afternoon. Didn't they say that wolves were afraid of the sound of gunshots? Then shouldn't the managers be able to scare them away by just firing a few shots? Perhaps they did not expect that the wolves would come, so it could have been too late for them to draw the guns. Or maybe the wolves carried out a sneak attack on the shooters. There could also be some other reasons, but the guns were probably still there at the factory. Renziasu ran as fast as he could towards the factory. He was more familiar with this place than the private army was. And besides, the private army was marching there while he was running. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out in the darkness. Then a prolonged series of deafening gunshots rattled through the night. There was even the screaming of humans. Renziasu suddenly turned around and looked in the direction of the sound. Clearly, the private army had encountered the wolves, and many of them were still getting attacked after firing their guns. Didn't they say the wolves were afraid of gunshots? Didn't they say it was an animal's instinct to avoid danger? Today, Renziasu gained a new awareness of something. Although beasts had evolved to become stronger, they had never been able to overcome their animal instincts. Rabbits still ate grass, and wolves were still afraid of gunshots. Unless everything had changed. Chapter 22, Guns. There was an intense battle in the wilderness as the private army had not expected to encounter wolves. The wolves were extremely fierce and cunning, and it seemed like they had been waiting in ambush. At first, the troops thought that they could scare away the wolves by just firing their guns, but it turned out they were wrong. The wolves did not panic this time when they heard the gunshots. By the time the wolves appeared in front of them, the private troops were shocked to discover that these wolves were even bigger than they had imagined. They were the size of bison. Wait a minute. After these wolves attacked the factory, they waited in the only possible path that the private army would have to pass through. Why did it seem like they had been targeting these private troops from the very beginning? However, the private troops were trained soldiers. Before the casualties started piling up, They fell in and began to defend. Comparing the firearms of humans with the sharp teeth and claws of an animal, firearms would still come out on top in the end. The private army had dealt with the wolves on more than one occasion. In recent years, they had slowly started pulling back on their plans to encircle and keep the wolves suppressed after being instructed to do so by the people in charge. Of course, this also gave the wolves some respite. For some reason, as Renzius listened to the gunshots, he found the cracks to be so pleasant that his adrenaline started pumping. The gunshots excited him. He didn't go and take a closer peek at the battle. All he knew was that if the wolves and the private army were fighting now, it would be safe for him to go to the factory. Renzius ran like a cheetah through the wilderness. For the first time, he could get a complete sense of his newly obtained strength and dexterity. His muscle fibers tensed up and relaxed over and over again. This sort of feeling could only be described as invigorating. When Renzius neared the factory, he finally slowed down. He hid in the darkness and approached it quietly. Renzius was surprised to see many of the refugees' dead bodies lying around. It seemed like they had wanted to escape back to town but were caught by the wolves one after another. Only a minority of them were lucky enough to escape at the expense of their companions. Renzius painstakingly examined their wounds. They looked like they had been bitten in the neck by the wolves and died immediately. However, the wolves did not feed on their corpses and seemingly left in a hurry. Renzius thought for a while. He did not enter through the main entrance, instead climbing his way up a pipe on the outside of the factory building. Each time he passed by a window, he would scrupulously check if there were still any survivors inside. When Renzius got to the top floor of the building, his heart sank. It didn't look like any survivors remained in the factory. The wolves had already swept through the entire factory, sparing no one. Where are the guns hidden? Renzius wondered. The factory managers would definitely not place them where it would be easily accessible to others. Renzius broke the glass window on the top floor and jumped into the building. He looked around and saw that the hallway was full of bloodstains and corpses. The large factory felt like a purgatory. All of a sudden, Renzius realized something was off. All of the corpses looked like they had been running in the same direction when they were alive, as though something was guiding them towards it. What would attract people to run towards the same place at such a crucial time? Renzius came to a conclusion. That place would either be the location of the weapons storage or a hiding place. He followed this path all the way until he ended up in the basement. Was this the emergency shelter? The more he walked forward, the more corpses there were. Renzius could imagine what the scene looked like when everyone was trying to escape in panic from the wolves. They wanted to escape to a safe place, but they were not fast enough to outrun the wolves. Renzius arrived at an iron door. Indeed, everyone was escaping towards this place because they wanted to get in. No matter how much the wolves had evolved, they were still only flesh and blood. It would still be rather difficult to break through an iron door several inches thick. Renzius wondered if anyone was still behind the iron door. He hesitated for quite a while before he raised his fist and knocked on the blast door 3 times. Someone behind the iron door shouted happily, "Is that the private army? You've finally come to rescue me. I'll open the door right away." The rhythm of the knocking was obvious and could not have been made by a wild animal. As such, the person on the inside mistook Renzius as a soldier from the private army that had been sent to rescue him. With a loud grinding sound, the iron door burst open and revealed a middle-aged man on the inside. He had a leg wound, and his pants were stained red with blood. Even as he opened the door, he was standing on just one leg. However, the moment the door opened, both parties took action. Renzius bent low and prepared to rush him. When the middle-aged man saw that the person in front of him was not a soldier, his first reaction was to raise his pistol. The atmosphere grew tense. Renzius stopped in front of the middle-aged man because the black muzzle of the pistol was pointed right at his forehead. "Hee," the middle-aged man laughed. "So it's the little burglar who wants to take advantage of the situation, eh? I recognize you, you're Renzius from town." Renzius also recognized him. The middle-aged man was the factory manager, Wang Dongyang. "I recognize you too," Ranziasu said as he straightened up as though nothing had happened. "Why are you the only person in there?" "No. You were the first person who fled here, and you closed the door immediately while keeping everyone else outside." Ranziasu felt a sudden chill pass through him. No wonder there were bloody handprints all over the outside of the iron door. So it turned out that it was because of the refugees' crazy thumping on it. When the iron door was closed from the inside, it was impossible to open it via normal means from the outside. Wang Dongyang laughed and said, "You don't need to bother yourself with such matters. If you carry me back to town now, I'll spare your life." "And what if I refuse to carry you back?" Ranziasu started laughing as well. "Then I will just kill you with one shot. After that, I'll lock the door again and continue to wait for the army to come and rescue me. I'm a resident of the stronghold, so they will definitely come and save me," Wang Dongyang said. "You must be afraid that I'll tell everyone how you sold out everyone here and left them for dead, right?" Ranziasu continued to laugh and say. Wang Dongyang sneered at him. As the pistol gave him tremendous courage, he had no fear at all. "How do you know that?" Ranziasu pondered for a moment. The father knows his son the best. Wang Dongyang was confused. Then factory manager grew infuriated. "Do you think I won't kill you?" "I also know another thing," Ranziasu said calmly. "What?" Wang Dongyang had a bad feeling about it. "I know you didn't disengage the safety on the gun, and it's too late for you to do so now." Wang Dongyang's pupils suddenly contracted. He had originally thought that it was the private army who came, so he didn't really think too much of it. But when he saw that it was Ranziasu, and Ranziasu had rushed in so decisively, he did not have enough time to disengage the safety. He had thought that he could easily frighten Ranziasu because he felt that a refugee like him would not have seen a gun before or know how it worked. He thought that he would only feel fear with one pointed at him. However, Ranziasu knew more about guns than the majority of people in Stronghold 113. Chapter 23, Basilwo. The factory manager, Wang Dongyang, felt a sense of despair growing as it grasped at his heart like a creeper vine. He didn't think he would get seen through by an unexpected development. He couldn't understand why this youth facing him knew about guns. A second later, he suddenly took a step back as he wanted to use this opportunity to disengage the safety. But Ranziasu would never give him the chance to do so. He charged at Wang Dongyang like a cannonball, crushing Wang Dongyang's ribs. Even his gun was sent flying out of his hand. Wang Dongyang had nothing to rely on now. He laid on the ground, coughing up blood, and said, "Let me go. I'll tell you where I kept all my belongings." "Tell me first and I'll let you go," Ranziasu said calmly. "Do you think I'm stupid?" Wang Dongyang actually knew this was just a futile attempt to be let off. How could this teen possibly let him go? If Ranziasu allowed him to leave, could he still survive in the vicinity of Stronghold 113? And when Wang Dongyang first learned of the existence of Ranziasu, he was even referred to as Ruthless Ranziasu. "Your lungs have already been pierced by your broken ribs, so it's too late for you even if you go back to town now." Ranziasu laughed. Although he was eager to get Wang Dongyang's belongings, it was clear that he would not tell him where he kept them. Ranziasu wasted no time here. He did not know when the battle between the private army and the wolves would end. But if he dragged his feet around here any longer, it would not end well for him no matter which side arrived at the factory. The sound of a sharp weapon cutting through leather tore the air. Ranziasu used the bone knife to imitate a wolf's claws slashing across Wang Dongyang's chest, creating fake wounds. He waited until he was certain Wang Dongyang's vital signs had stopped before he picked up the pistol and headed out. Ranziasu also took the 2 magazines Wang Dongyang carried on him. There were a total of 36 bullets. By the time Ranziasu left the factory, no one remained alive. Ranziasu turned around and gazed at the building where a bloodbath had taken place. Behind him was the darkness of night. This was the world he lived in. "Bro, are you alright?" Yan Liuyuan said eagerly when he saw Renziasu lift the curtain door and walk in. He circled around Renziasu to check if there were any bloodstains on him before he felt at ease. "I'm fine." While tying the bone knife back around his calf, Renziasu asked, "Did anything happen in town while I was away? Is the private army back yet?" "Some of them have returned. They brought some wounded soldiers back with them, as well as the dead bodies of their fellow soldiers and carcasses of the wolves. I heard that the rest of the troops continued on to the factory," Yan Liuyuan said. Renziasu didn't think that this was unusual. No matter how strong the wild wolves might be, it would be impossible for them to win when faced with a private army that was several times greater than them in number. Moreover, the soldiers were even carrying weapons with them. "How many wolf carcasses did they bring back?" Renziasu asked. "Over 30 of them." Yan Liuyuan said, "Bro, those wild wolves are enormous." When Yan Liuyuan had asked Renziasu what size the wolves were, Renziasu just described them as very big. As for what very big truly meant, Yan Liuyuan found out today. Renziasu frowned. He was glad that he hadn't stayed at the factory for too long. Otherwise, he would likely have run into the private army that arrived at the factory shortly after. It seemed that the wolves withdrew once they felt that their ambush had failed. So the battle with them did not delay the private army for too long. It was no wonder he didn't hear any gunshots in the wilderness when he came back via an alternate route. However, the wolves were getting stronger and smarter. If they let them go this time, the people in town might have to face an even stronger attack from them the next time. Suddenly, a commotion brewed outside. Renziasu lifted the curtain door and watched what was happening. It turned out that a group of 10 soldiers from the private army had driven back in advance in an off-road vehicle. An officer in the vehicle said, "Anyone who volunteers any information on those who went out of town tonight will be handsomely rewarded." Renziasu was taken aback because he knew they were clearly looking for him. They must have already gone to the factory and looked around the place. Renziasu had thought that it would be impossible for a normal person to discover the phoniness of Wang Dongyang's wounds. However, there was still a crucial problem that could not be reconciled: Wang Dongyang's pistol had gone missing. If someone worked backwards upon discovering this problem, it would be easy to get clues on what had happened. This was something that Renziasu could not prevent. "Bro." Yan Liuyuan got worried as he looked at Renziasu. "I'll be fine." Renziasu pushed Yan Liuyuan's head back into the shack. Renziasu carefully recalled that he did not take the main road when he left town. If he remembered it accurately, no one should have any idea that he had gone out other than Yan Liuyuan. The soldiers were standing guard at the entrance of the town. Soon after, all of the other soldiers returned as well. The people in town watched. Right afterwards, the private troops began going door to door and rummaged through every household storage chests and cabinets. They were searching for that gun. Suddenly, a familiar voice shouted, "I know who went out in the middle of the night." Renziasu turned around and saw that it was the clinic's doctor, Yu Tong. He was looking at Renziasu with a smile on his face and standing very far away from him, as he was afraid that Renziasu would try to kill him. The private army's officer strolled over and asked, "Who?" "It's him, Renziasu. I saw him go out of town with my very own eyes," Yu Tong said with an arrogant smile. Renziasu did not deny this. He admitted, "At that time, the town's common privy was occupied by Hezong, so I had to go outside to relieve myself." "Who is Hezong? Is he telling the truth?" the officer shouted. Hezong, who was standing nearby, had a dumbfounded look on his face as he did not know how he suddenly got implicated in this. He said meekly, "Indeed, I had diarrhea tonight. Many people can testify." The officer turned around and looked at Renziasu as he sneered, "Search." After he said that, Wang Fugi darted out before his soldiers could rush into the shack. "Wait a minute, he's someone who has been singled out by one of the aristocrats in the stronghold to be taken care of. You can't treat him like this." The officer was stunned. "What do you mean?" In the afternoon, Boss Luolan from the stronghold specially ordered for him to be taken care of. Even Ranziasu himself doesn't know about this yet. But as for why he is doing this, you'll have to ask Boss Luo yourself. It's not convenient for us to reveal it to you, Wang Fugi explained quickly. Boss Luo? The officer was a little surprised. Everyone could tell from his reaction that he clearly knew the boss who went by the name of Luolan. In fact, it even seemed like he was a big shot in the stronghold. The officer thought for a moment and said, even if he is Boss Luo's guy, we must still search him. This is a very serious matter. I'll personally apologize and explain it to Boss Luo tonight. After saying that, the soldiers rushed into Ranziasu's shack and rummaged through their belongings. Another 2 soldiers carried out a body search on Ranziasu. 2 minutes later, the soldiers were all shaking their heads when the search did not turn up anything. The officer looked at Ranziasu. Bring me to the place where you took a dump. Ranziasu frowned as he made his way out of town. He didn't expect the officer to be so rigorous with the checks in order not to miss any details. Yan Liui Uan, who was behind him, was about to run over. However, Ranziasu turned around and snapped, "Get back inside." Yan Liui Uan's eyes reddened. Ranziasu led the officer and soldiers out of town. He pointed to a pool of feces and said, "There, it's still hot and fresh." The officer had a look at it and then ordered the soldiers to continue searching the other households. They did not bother with Ranziasu anymore. Ranziasu could finally heave a sigh of relief. Fortunately, he was well prepared. Before he left town, he observed the surroundings and thought of a reason before he came back. Not only did he bury the gun outside of town, he also laid the last of the situational evidence to cover his lie. By taking a dump right outside of town. He turned his gaze to Yu Tong, who had been following them. Yu Tong pissed his pants when he saw the daggers in Ranziasu's eyes. C-24, Ranziasu, the drug dealer. At first, Ranziasu was unsure whether the clinic's owner, Yu Tong, had really spotted him going out of town or if he was deliberately trying to frame him even though he did not see anything. Later, he recalled that he had not seen Yu Tong at that time. Ranziasu knew he would have to be wary of Yu Tong after stealing his business in case Yu Tong tried to take revenge on him. After all, it was always necessary to be cautious of scheming people in times like this. As such, if Ranziasu did not have any impression of such dangerous targets appearing in his memory, it would surely mean that the other party had not witnessed him leaving town. Therefore, it was more than likely that Yu Tong was deliberately lying to frame Ranziasu. As for whether Yu Tong had considered the consequences of unsuccessfully framing him, Ranziasu felt that he was not smart enough to have considered this scenario. In the past, Ranziasu could tolerate Yu Tong's antics. As he had stolen some of his business away, Ranziasu could not bear to thoroughly break his living. Thus, he exhorted Yu Tong to return to his medical books and study them well. In the end, not only did he not take his advice, he even plotted against him. Ranziasu sneered as he looked at Yu Tong, who had turned tail and fled back to town. There was also a puddle on the ground where he had been standing. Next to him, Wang Fugi laughed and said, "Looks like my intervention was not needed after all. You were going to be alright anyway." Ranziasu turned his head to Wang Fugi and thanked him earnestly. He would remember those who were willing to step forward and put in a good word for him in a situation like this. "Hey, no need to be so polite." Wang Fugi smiled brightly. "If not for Boss Luo's appreciation of you, I would have been too scared to step forward and speak up for you. Boss Luo specifically sent someone to bring word to the town administrators to look out for you." Ranziasu was taken aback. "Who's Boss Luo? Does he know me?" Wang Fugi winked at him and whispered, "That medicine of yours. Boss Luo likes it a lot." Ranziasu was speechless. Ranziasu realized that the black medicine that Wang Fugi purchased from him had been sent into the stronghold. "Boss Luo has given his word that as long as you hand over a fixed amount of the black medicine on time each month, he will ensure that you'll be free from trouble here outside the stronghold," Wang Fugi said with a smile. In reality, he had an ulterior motive for doing this. After all, He could ensure his own safety by acting as the intermediary for Ranziasu's black medicine that Basilwo wanted. Suddenly, Ranziasu got an idea. Is Basilwo very influential and powerful in the stronghold? You still don't know, do you? Wang Fuki declared proudly, he is the King Consortium's representative in Stronghold 113. If he's the representative of the King Consortium, why isn't his surname King? Ranziasu felt that something was off here. Don't go shooting your mouth off after I tell you. Wang Fuki lowered his voice to a whisper. It's said that he's the half-brother of some big shot within the King Consortium, an illegitimate son of the family. Then can you ask Basilwo to help get us into the stronghold? Ranziasu thought that if an influential person like Basilwo, who had great authority in the stronghold, helped them, it wouldn't be too difficult to get them in, right? We're all contaminated, so how can we be allowed inside the stronghold? Wang Fuki said with a sad frown. Besides, if you get into the stronghold, who's going to pick the wild medicinal herbs for Basilwo? Ranziasu had a realization. The latter half of the sentence was actually the truth as to why he wasn't going to be allowed into the stronghold, right? For Basilwo, there was no reason at all to bring Ranziasu and the others in. He could leave them outside the stronghold and have Ranziasu continue supplying him with the black medicine. That same night, Yan Liuyuan suddenly ran a high fever. Ranziasu exchanged a bottle of black medicine and tried applying it on Yan Liuyuan's forehead, but it did not make his fever go down. Ranziasu sat beside the bed and looked at the feeble Yan Liuyuan. He said with a sigh, you didn't have to make a wish for this. Don't make any wishes without me asking you to do so in the future, understand? The fevers that you get as a result could end up killing you. Yan Liuyuan could barely open his eyes as he said weakly, but what am I to do if something happens to you? Ranziasu lowered his head and thought for a long time. Don't be stubborn. I will definitely ensure that we'll lead a comfortable life together someday. MHM. The next morning, when Ranziasu went to town to fetch water, he was surprised to hear a piece of news. Yutong had packed all of his belongings and money and run away in the night. He would rather face the dangers lurking in the wilderness than face Ranziasu. Someone said that Yutong had gone to Stronghold 114 because it was the closest to Stronghold 113 and was also in the opposite direction of where the wolves appeared. As long as he took the main road there, he should be fine. Ranziasu did not know whether to laugh or cry. Yutong had actually run away in fear. However, something that surprised Ranziasu even more happened. Chen Haidong, who was an administrator sent from the stronghold, came knocking on his door. He asked affably, Ranziasu, I heard that you know how to heal people and save their lives? Ranziasu was taken aback. I can only treat knife wounds and external injuries. That's fine, that's fine. Chen Haidong was smiling even more happily now. That still makes you a doctor. Now that our town no longer has a doctor, do you think you'd be interested in becoming one? Yan Liuyuan, who was still lying down in the shack with a fever, opened his eyes in shock. This brother of his had only wanted to earn some gratitude tokens and money initially, so how did he suddenly become a real doctor? Furthermore, he was going to become the only doctor in town too? He didn't even have to make a wish for that. Was it because it was unnecessary to make that wish for Ranziasu's incident last night that it somehow changed his luck? However, Ranziasu understood that this was only happening because the administrator, Chen Haidong, was also trying to get into Basilwo's good books. Authority made the people around you want to serve you meticulously. Ranziasu was not dumb. He agreed immediately and said, about that house at the clinic, can I? Yes, you can. Chen Haidong said with a friendly smile, you totally can. You can move in today since no one is living there. Chen Haidong then walked off, his hands behind his back, while humming a little ditty. Right after, Old Wang came back with a wooden box tucked under his armpit. After Old Wang arrived, some of the people, who were rumored to be members of the richest group in town and lived in brick houses, also dropped by. Some of them operated small gambling dens, drapers' shops, and grain shops. Old Wang said, "Congratulations, Renziasu. You get to live in a brick house just like that." During the conversation, Old Wang handed a gift box to Renziasu. "I got a small present for you and Lai Yui Uan. Since both of you are still growing, eating this will help strengthen your bodies." Curious, Renziasu opened it and was surprised to see a white lump. "What is this?" "You don't know what this is, right? I've kept this bird's nest for many years," Wang Fugi explained. "It's really nourishing." Renziasu had only heard of this stuff. He had never seen it before. However, he had always had doubts about it. Mr. Zhang Jinglan said that bird's nest is made from a swiftlet's saliva, but I don't think that the viscosity of saliva can be that thick, so it's probably made of phlegm? Wang Fugi was annoyed. "Don't make my gift sound so disgusting," he said unhappily. "Then what about blood bird's nest one? What is that made of?" Renziasu gave it some thought. "Phlegm tainted by blood?" C25, a banner. Chapter 25, a banner. "Give it back to me if you don't want it. You don't have to make it sound so disgusting," Wang Fugi said as he tried to snatch the bird's nest back. Renziasu happily covered up the bird's nest box and threw it into the shack. "Come on, it was just a joke. I didn't mean to make it sound disgusting." He looked at the people behind Old Wang. Frankly, if he were to address them as esquires, that would be an insult to the word esquire. These people were all holding some gifts in their hands. Actually, everyone here was no stranger to Renziasu. Their main intention in coming over this time was to exchange civilities with Renziasu. What this meant was that they had accepted him into their circle, and they were all going to be friends from now on. Renziasu did not stand on ceremony with them. Yan Lai Yui Uan was still lying in bed and recuperating at this moment, so if there were tonics for them, why not? "Renziasu." Old Wang pulled him aside and said, "You should move into the clinic as soon as possible. There are 2 other houses attached behind the clinic, and it comes with a yard measuring over a dozen square meters. A lot of people are already eyeing the place." Okay. Renziasu nodded. He was still quite polite towards Wang Fugi. "Furthermore, Boss Luo has gotten his people to send you some medical supplies from the stronghold. These are all worth quite a bit of money. I've already told them to send the supplies to the clinic. The most expensive ones are the anti-inflammatory pills and anesthetics. You had better keep an eye on them," Wang Fugi whispered. "There are people who steal anesthetics as a substitute for their smoking addiction when they can't get their hands on cigarettes. I've suffered losses from such cases." Renziasu was taken aback. He didn't think that anesthetics had such an effect. However, it was still good to have someone give him things for free. Hoping for more, he asked, "Did he send anything else?" "There's a banner as well." In the morning, Renziasu and Siu threw their belongings together in a pack and headed to the clinic. Who would want to live in a shack when they could live in a brick house with bright windows and clean tables? He had already planned for Yan Lai Yui Uan and himself to live in one of the 2 rear houses, while Ziu could live in the other. Ziu had initially lived in a brick house. After that, she moved into a shack for the sake of these 2 younger brothers. Now that Ziu could live in the brick house again, one of Renziasu's wishes could be considered fulfilled. But when Renziasu walked into the clinic carrying Yan Lai Yui Uan on his back, he was dumbfounded. He saw a banner hanging in the middle of the clinic's wall. It was emblazoned with the words "Magic Hands Restore Spring," from Luolan. According to Wang Fugi, as long as the banner was hanging in the clinic, no one would dare to do anything to Renziasu. But of course, Renziasu would first have to not involve himself in anything that went against Luolan's interests. This would act as a talisman for them, even though it made Renziasu feel very uncomfortable. He did not know if Luolan had casually instructed his people to make the banner or if he was deliberately teasing him. It's probably the former, right? After all, in Luolan's eyes, Renziasu was only a refugee who sold medicine outside of the stronghold. Renziasu helped Yan Lai Yui Uan get settled in. Ranzius did not tell Ziul about Yan Lai Yui's condition last night because he was afraid to disturb her sleep. She only found out about it this morning, so she was feeling terrible. Yan Lai Yuan was thoroughly enjoying Ziul's meticulous care for him. Suddenly, he thought of how he always used to make fun of her, so he said weakly, "Big sister Ziul, I'm sorry for behaving the way I did in the past." Ziul looked at him. "The two of you are imps, so there's no need to apologize to your sister. But if you weren't more mature than the other kids, you wouldn't have survived until now." "That's mainly because my brother is amazing." Yan Lai Yuan laughed. "I wonder how much hardship that kid has had to suffer through the years." Ziul sighed. "Countless hardships," replied Yan Lai Yuan calmly. Ranziasu was currently browsing through and checking the medicine that was left behind in the clinic, as well as the new medical supplies sent over on the orders of Luolan. Perhaps someone had informed Boss Luo that he specialized in treating wounds, as he had sent a lot more anesthetics and anti-inflammatory pills over. Ranziasu was overjoyed when he saw that there were fever relievers and antidotes inside the crate of medicine. He brought the anti-inflammatory pills, fever relievers, and antidotes to Yan Lai Yuan and made him take them. The main symptom of Yan Lai Yuan's illness was the inflammation of the tonsils caused by excessive internal heat. It didn't matter if this medicine was suitable for the symptoms. It would cure the illness. There were also some medicinal herbs in the clinic. Some of the cabinets had the names of medicinal herbs written on them and the treatment suggestions for the different types of symptoms. Renzius lamented how Yutong did not cherish his chances even though he had such a good father. That same night, Yan Lai Yuan's fever finally subsided. Only then did Ranzius heave a sigh of relief. He said to Ziul, "You can brew the tonics that those people brought over. You and Lai Yuan can eat them." "Alright." Ziul nodded and went to make dinner. Recently, the three of them were just like siblings and were at ease around each other. Sometimes, fate was a wonderful thing. These three who did not seem to fit together did just that. When Ziul returned with the dishes, she shouted for Ranziasu and Yan Lai Yuan to eat. Ranziasu suddenly thought of something and said, "Ziul, since you'll be living next door from now on, you can use the place as your bridal chamber when you get married." Ziul's expression changed right as she was about to pass a bowl of rice to Ranziasu. "You're getting sick of me so soon? Do I eat a lot? Or do I waste money?" Ranziasu was stunned. "Big sister Ziul, that's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Ziul took the bowl back and said spitefully, "Ranziasu, you're such a heartless person. You're eating the food that I cooked and you still wish to kick me out? Even if I fed it to a dog, I wouldn't let you eat it." Ziul then shoved the bowl into Yan Lai Yuan's hands and said, "Finish the rice." Yan Lai Yuan was confused. After saying that, Ziul was the first to break into laughter. Then Ranziasu and Yan Lai Yuan laughed along. Yan Lai Yuan suddenly felt that Ziul looked tender and gentle when she was laughing. It was just a pity that she was born in the wrong era. "Ziasu, what plans do you have for the future?" Ziul asked as she ate. "I've no plans at the moment. I'm just gonna take it one step at a time," Ranziasu said. He was still most concerned about the quest weapon that had yet to be unlocked. Ranziasu's initial wish was to ensure that he and Yan Lai Yuan could carry on living well. But when he realized that he had a superpower, he couldn't help thinking that there was more that he desired now. And now, the repeatable quest was not complete. He still had to successfully treat 10 patients. He didn't know what the new quest would reward him with. As for the mysterious vending machine, would there be any other products besides the black medicine? All these unknowns were awaiting discovery. Yan Lai Yuan looked at Ranziasu with much anticipation. "Bro, what are we going to do tomorrow? Can I help you treat the patients?" Ranziasu chuckled. "Why? Are you well again?" "Yes," Yan Lai Yuan replied. Having finished dinner, he was in rather good spirits. "I'm feeling fine already." "MHM." Ranziasu nodded. "Go to school if you're fine then." "Okay."